Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com.
Hey, back again with another one of these talking head videos. So, I'm going to try to get through two of them in this one if I can. They might be fairly complicated. I've kind of scanned them over and they're both pretty good questions. So, this one's from Jeffrey. So, hey Alan, I made a bourbon and I use 4% honey biscuit malt. It's about 3 months old, so I had a taste. Sadly, the specialty malt flavor has faded from what it was white. So like an idiot with some form of a thought, I decided to attempt to make a mash with a lot of very dark malts and grains. So this is where I'm at so far. The bill includes Breeze Black Prince Malt 10, Breeze Midnight Wheat 10 pounds, Black Swan Coffee Malt 8 pounds, Warminster Chocolate 350L Malt 10 pounds, Flaked Oats 2 pounds just because I had them. I was hoping to make something white with a shit ton of flavor. It turns out the flavor I got was dumpster fire. That's funny shit. It was so wretched that on that I had to run it through a reflux still twice to get something that resembles neutral. My question is if there's a reasonable standard for the use of specialty malts, or does it depend on the individual malt? As always, thank you for your insights. So yes, there does tend to be sort of a threshold of positive flavor versus negative flavor, and bear in mind that when you are maturing one of these whiskeys with a specialty malt in it, you are going to lose some of that initial pop of that specialty malt. So you went two things here. So first of all, the honey malt, for me, I typically find that somewhere in the 10 to 12% range works really well. Now some people will tell you that's high, but if you're going to use it and you're going to mature for 4 or 6 years or for any decent amount of time, that works out really well. It doesn't work out with everything. You don't want to do sweet on sweet. We've talked about that before, contrast and flavor bridging and all that stuff. So I use honey malts with a version of Lee Sinclair mash bill that's inverted. So the normal Lee Sinclair is 60% corn, 17 wheat, 13 oats, and 10% caramel malt. This other version is 60% corn, 17 rye, 13% oats, and 10% honey malt. And it's worked out really well at 2 and 3 years old for bourbon, and even coming up on 4 years old now. Caramel malt, I also do at 10% quite often in a bourbon mash bill. Munich malt, aromatic Munich, Victory malt, those are all in the 5 to 10%. Chocolate malt generally, 3 to 5% tends to be enough, although I will tell you that I do a chocolate malt corn whiskey where the emphasis is specifically on those roasted coffee / chocolate notes, and I hit it with a full 10%. But now it's going to mature in a used bourbon barrel that already has a lot of flavor in it for at least 4 years to be bottled and bond, so it holds up well. What you did here secondarily is you went all the dark colors, right? You went completely roasted 100% other than the little bit of oats that you had there. And yeah, man, you get more than 10% of chocolate malt in something, and that's all you're going to taste off of it. I mean, even in the corn whiskey that we're doing, the Charles Ballard corn whiskey with the 10% chocolate malt, you have a hard time tasting the corn characteristic there. Now there's a sweet note there, but you don't really taste the corn, right? Because that dark chocolate stuff just overruns it. Again, 3 to 5%, 10% on the high side tends to be kind of where you want to be at with those really, really dark malts in particular. So great question though, and that's one that I don't often see. It's funny because when I first started at Spirits of French Lick, we had a, let me rephrase that, I didn't. The owner had a consultant, and he was kind of a personality in the moonshine world at one point in time too, and I like the guy just fine now, but at the time he could fuck right off is what I would say. You know, he knew that I was doing some home distilling as well, and he knew that I was wanting to play around with a bunch of different types of specialty malts and had played around with them in the past, and he did his best to convince the owner that those specialty malts wouldn't affect the flavor whatsoever and weren't worth the extra money to buy them. And well, you know what, several awards later from some big names in the industry, you were wrong. It's okay, you can admit it now. I don't even think you're in the industry anymore, so there's that. I love specialty malts, you know, even something as simple as just caramel malt. and you take a traditional mash bill, like the only traditional mash bill that we have is basically the old APH Stitzel wheated bourbon. It's a little modified, but you're talking 70% corn, 20% wheat, and 10% malt. They use distiller's malt. We switch out for caramel malt, and it brings a whole nother flavor profile to that particular style of whiskey. You know, it takes that sort of cream cheese icing note and that bran note that wheat typically has, sweetens it up even more, raises the intensity of it, and then also falls into that bran, that earthy, beautiful earthy thing that wheat bran has to it. So it modifies both the sweetness and that earthiness of that particular mash bill. So hope that answered your questions, man. Let's see what else we got here. So here's one from Dan the Man. So Alan, once again, thanks for all you do in educating those of us who are curious and want to know more about this craft from both the methodology and intellectual perspective. Reads fancier than it should, meaning I really enjoy the hows but really appreciate the whys. It gives a much better understanding of what is going on. Not to say that you don't deserve / need further haranguing about how hard it is to find your stuff. You need a hashtag one piece at a time tag or something, so we can refer to your stuff more easily, and it would help if you put a bit more in your description section to describe the questions you're handling, so I and others can find the one where you talk about whatever without the heavy-duty transcript search that many do not even know about and usually results in too many finds. You need to organize your content at least as well as your garden. Point well taken. I'm going to comment on that real quick. So usually I'm stretched for time doing the things that I'm doing between this, the Distillers Talk podcast, the One Piece at a Time podcast, the If You Have Ghosts You Have Everything podcast, the various different tastings, signings, etc. that I do for work, plus actual work, plus having a family, etc. I'm very bad at writing those descriptors because most of the time the only time I have to upload these videos is when I'm at work. So most of the time I'm in the middle of work while I'm trying to upload these videos or upload a podcast or something like that, where I just have a few minutes of downtime, and it usually doesn't give me enough time to be able to write out a good descriptor, keep up with hashtags, etc. And I do apologize for that. I would like to say that I will do better at that, but I also know how I am, and I know that I'm lazy, and I know that I don't have enough time to do it. One day I will get someone to manage all of this stuff to some degree, even if I have to pay them something, so that way it is organized in a much better way. I have a lot of content. I've done a lot of things. None of it short of the books and or the actual content and the videos and or the podcast is organized in any great way, and that is true, and I do appreciate you telling me that, and I do understand it. So one of these days I will get it straightened out, guaranteed. So, but as to the distilling question, I promised. I hope I can get it across well. Well, there are a few, but to me they are related. Higher proof equals less flavor is a mantra, but is this due to dilution of the flavors by the ethanol, less water which carries the flavor, less flavor, or does the remaining water lose flavor too? Which leads me to, where does the flavor go? Will it appear again in higher concentration later in the run, or is it lost forever? Consider a run of flavorful mash running low and slow, so the distillate is running 170 plus, presumably stripping flavor. Letting it run to 100, mixing it all together, putting aside a bit of 100, you wind up at 130. Contrasted to a run where it is run at 150 and less, again to 100, mixed, saving some 100 and winding up again at 130. How different would the two versions be in taste? How would the 100 set-asides differ? Would it matter if it were whiskey or rum being distilled? So what's actually happening is you are dropping out more water, so you have less flavor. The ethanol itself actually carries no discernible flavor. That's why you can make neutral grain or neutral grape or whatever. Now there's a little flavor that gets left behind because there's a little water that gets left behind, right? So if you have a grape-based neutral, you're going to taste a little grape or maybe pick up some aroma of some grape. If you have a grain-based neutral, you're going to probably taste a little grain or pick up a little aroma of the grain, etc. But it's because you drop the water out, and that water is what's carrying all those oils, and those oils are where the flavor comes from, right? The essential oil, as it were. It's the same as distilling essential oil. What happens to the flavor? Is it gone forever, right? So where does it go? So where it goes is into the tails, and it's usually a very steep decline from when you do a high pass distillation with plates and reflux, etc. From wherever you're at, dropping 5-10 proof points throughout the hearts, and then down, right? just falls off completely real quick. Sometimes you're not even dropping 5 proof points, right? You know, you're compressing everything. You're making a lesser amount of volume. All that flavor is in those tails. It's 100% in those tails. Anybody who's ever ran a highline distillation, got through their hearts and said, well, I'm not going to sit here and waste the time to reflux it. I'll just cut this thing over to pot still mode and run all this off as tails. They'll go in and they can taste, you know, taste what's there. Now it's going to drop proof again still because you've taken most of the alcohol off, compressed most of the alcohol, right? But you can taste that remaining alcohol / water mixture it's coming across and taste those tails. And a lot of times it's super vegetative, just like regular tails are. They can be run again in the next run of vodka. You can continue to try to rectify that over and over and over and over and over again. The flavor doesn't disappear completely. It just gets left behind in the pot because the water got left behind in the pot. On your second question here, so running distillate up to 170, presumably stripping flavor. What I would say there is you're not stripping flavor as much as selecting flavors at 170. So at 170, think more floral, sometimes more herbal, less earthy, basically, maybe less fruity. Dropping some of that stuff out. Letting it run to 100, mixing it all together, putting aside a little bit of 100. If you wind up at 130, so contrasted to a run where it's run at 150 and less, again to 100, mixed, saving some 100 and winding up again at 30. How different would the two versions be in taste, and how would the 100 set-asides differ? Would it matter if it were whiskey or rum being distilled? So the problem is that there wouldn't be the quality of the 170. Dropping that 100 and mixing it in wouldn't be very good, because again, just like going to 190, you've compressed everything, so you have a limited hearts window of proof points that you're going to select from before you drop into what's considered tails. And anything below that point, say if you're running at 170, a lot of times by the time you're down to 160 or 162, you're already into the tails of that run. If you want to hold that proof point and you want to have that flavor where it's at and be a little bit more on the lighter side, you could say more neutral side, I suppose. So that particular product, if you were to add those tails into it, it's going to be pretty nasty. It's going to be pretty vegetative, and it's not going to compare well to the regular, say, pot stilled or the 150 and less down to 100 and mixed at all. If you were to take the jars of the two 100 proof samples from the both 170 proof highline distillate and the 150 proof, let's just call it double pot still distillate, and compare those two jars of 100, the 100 from the 150 pot still distillate is going to drink like it's on the verge of tails, because you're getting to the verge of tails for pot still at 100 proof, right? Especially if you're making a white spirit, you're certainly on the edge of being in tails if you're not already in tails at 100 on double pot still there. The 100 from the 170 plus is going to be pretty gross, fairly well swamp water, right? All that flavor still there, it's just currently setting in a negative flavor state. It needs to be run again and rectified and separated from the various phlegms that you do not want in that particular distillate. But it's not going to be something you would want to drink, and it certainly would not compare favorably to the 100 proof from the pot still. I know that all sounds confusing. I hope that the way I said it makes sense. That one's kind of a hard one to break down, but I think you probably get the gist of it. And if you have any more questions on it, feel free to ask me. I'm glad to help you out with that. And again, eventually I will work on trying to better organize and describe the videos here on one piece at a time. Just not enough time in the day sometimes, man. All right, guys, as always, I love y'all. Catch you later.